Ramadan Online. Stay connected to the East London Mosque.
East London Mosque and London Muslim Centre would love to say thank you to the following businesses and charities for sponsoring our Ramadan Online 2021 programme: Islamic Relief, Untitled Aid, Global Relief Trust, Penny Appeal, Muslim Aid, Human Relief Foundation, Muslim Burial Fund, Irani Taylor Solicitors, City Realtor, AWMA Architecture.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, I'll be discussing something on the topic of liberation of self and society through fasting today. As Muslims, we have to be really aware of where we're living, the times and places that we're living in, inshallah. And as we know, there's a lot of discontent, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the present day, not the least because of the end or coming towards the end of almost over a year of the pandemic globally that's affected millions and millions of people. And just recently we're witnessing the devastation that it has caused in India and possibly spreading to neighboring countries. The first world, well, the more advanced countries, if you like, I don't like to call them the first world, but are apparently controlling this virus and pandemic with the vaccination, etc., and other means of controlling the spread of the disease. But poorer countries, less developed countries, haven't been that fortunate. So you have this sense of global despair as well. There's many other complaints that people have politically, economically, environmentally. You know, 2050 is a date that all of the countries are working towards to reduce carbon emission. The activists are saying that's not enough, it needs to be sooner. So there is this sense of urgency that things are going wrong. Politically we see a divided world, divided countries. In Europe we see the rise of the right, fascism, racism, nationalism, populism. In America we saw the last 4 years culminating in an almost coup of the White House because of a divided nation, basically left and right. So there's a lot of negativity around, a lot of despair around, a lot of loss of hope around. And you have books that have come out like titled End of Democracy or Why Liberalism Has Failed. So these are the times we're living in, and what this session hopefully hopes to do is see how fasting and the month of Ramadan can be related to these situations, especially in relation to individuals, ourselves, like the self, and as societies. What has Ramadan, what has Islam, what has fasting have to offer in our current situation, in our current context? What does it speak to in terms of our situation today? Now, by and large, we live in liberal democracies in the West, I'm talking about. There's been much talk of, you know, the idea of liberty, the idea of a liberal society, right? What that basically means is that people are not controlled by a tyrannical ruler or a king. They're not forced to believe in any faith system. You know, they're left with their own choices, if you like. Economically, they are free. They're not working as peasants for some oppressive landowners, right? So economic, political, individual liberty, this is kind of what liberalism stands for, if you like, in very short and brief. But it wasn't always like that, and we have to understand very briefly the evolution of how we came here, if you like. And we have to understand that this is a break from the past. This is a break from what human societies knew, especially in the West, particularly. This is a break from the old. This is a break from the old ways of living, the old ways of values, the old cultures, if you like. If you look at Greek society, and I'm not saying that Europe is simply a continuation of Greek society. Of course it's not, because Greece is a particular place in Europe. The culture and ideas of Greece didn't kind of transcend its own particular geographical boundaries for many centuries. But even in a society like the city-states of Greece, right, at the time of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, there was this concern about virtues, about the self, about self-government being a representative or the projection of the individual person, right? So if the individual person inculcated virtues like justice and truth and courage and patience and things like that, the hope was that would be also reflected, wisdom, that would be reflected in society, and it would be reflected in the system of self-governance, if you like. So where people choose their elected or elect their representatives to rule jointly as a society without having a king or just one person of authority in place. Now, skip forward even Christianity for the last 2,000 years, and certainly before, certainly for the first 1,500 years, and particularly in Europe, probably for the last 1,500 years, right? It had this sense of value of individuals as creatures who were created with a sense of purpose in this world. It had a sense of fixed moral values, right? A sense of right and wrong, a sense of place and belonging for individuals, right? Everybody belonged to their local church or whichever denomination of a church. People were expected to be truthful, people were expected to be just, etc. Of course, it wasn't always like that. It wasn't perfect in terms of practicality, but at least the theory, assumptions, the understanding of individuals and life, it was based on these principles and these values, and to some effect, or in some respects, it was reflected in how communities and societies lived. But with liberalism comes, 400 years ago or 400 to 500 years ago, over stages within the last 400 to 500 years, different stages, there's a clear break. There's a clear break in terms of what liberty stands for and what it means for the individual. And the most fundamental break in understanding with the past is the idea of being free from control of culture or societal institutes, right? Whether they be faith-based or other institutes. So to be free from tradition, culture, including faith and religion. So basically the individual is not controlled by values or systems or system of faith imposed from above. That's number one. And number two is the idea of the individual having the freedom to act in accordance to their desires and wishes, as long as it doesn't harm others. But this principle of, as long as I'm not harming others, I should be able to do and act and live however I want. And the last one is this pursuit, the freedom to pursue economic advantage or economic gain, right? Science, the last 300-400 years saw this huge development in scientific discoveries that kicked off the whole industrial revolution, prosperity, different economic systems coming in place, the rise of capitalism, etc. So these things came together in kind of, all converged together, if you like, to produce a time and place and a set of values for individuals where they were free from the past, free from control of religion or culture or traditions or superstitions or whatever. And by and large, beginning to become free from the control of a tyrannical ruler or a oppressive king, of course, a little bit later on. And thirdly, free to pursue whatever they wished, whatever they desired, particularly economic, material prosperity. Right? These were the key three things that the modern version of liberalism brought into place. Now, what has been the ramifications of that? The reason why people are writing books like The End of Democracy or Why Liberalism Failed, and other books, many other titles, on lamenting the failure of our cultures and societies in terms of what they represent for individuals, what they represent for ethics and virtue and morality, and the general well-being of human beings. The reason people are writing this is because they saw that when you take away the individual from their identity and place in a social structure. So in the past, a person's belonging and identity, the first belonging is the family. So the person is placed in a family. Of course, you're born in a family. You naturally have your identity, you belong to a particular family. That family usually, of course, is part of a larger family, right, locally, which is part of either town or village, is connected to local associations, is connected to local, probably a church. So you have a very fixed social structure around you, even political, social, religious structure around you, to which you belong to. And it's very clear, it's very stable. And there's no confusion about who you are, where you belong, your identity, etc. What the modern version of liberalism does in this attempt to free man from those cultures, traditions, those structures, is sets man on a path of independence. So you cut off the connections, no local associations. People decry the death of communities. This is why it's happened. You know, you cut yourself off from any system of faith. You experiment with not only individual social identity, but physical, biological identity. You no longer are sure of whether, in terms of gender, what gender you are, and how many genders there are. You're not sure of the best structure for human families. You know, the traditional structure of human families, of a father and a mother and children. This is all comes under fire in terms of questioning whether that is the best thing. Should everybody be following that? Does it have to be that way, etc. So you have the individual being ripped away from those values, from those connections, from those associations, from that real kind of solid identity and place in society and local communities. And now you have individuals who are accountable to nobody apart from the state in certain respects, who belong nowhere. Like people say, there are so many people in a block of flats, right, or a neighborhood, but nobody knows each other. And the advent of digital, social media, all of that, of course, exacerbates this situation many-fold with high speed, if you like. How does that affect individuals' morality? How does that affect societies? Well, once you're free from tradition, from culture, and from even the regulating effects of family and relatives and those kind of immediate social structures, and you're free from local associations, you're free from religious values, ethical values, then you're free to do what you want. You're free to pursue basically your desires, whatever your whims and wishes drive you towards. And human nature, as many economists have discovered, human nature is to pursue the maximum pleasure, right? The maximum utility. That's what human human beings will do. Once they're set free, in inverted commas, free, once they're set free, they will usually follow their desires. The desire to own more, to earn more, to consume more, right? The desire to instantly satisfy our pleasures, our instant, most fundamental and basic desires, whether that's economically, whether that's sexually, whether it's other ways. These are the pursuits that people will be busy with. And that's really causing a crisis. Its impact and effects. What happens when children are not brought up in the family structure? You only have to look at care homes and the people who go through the system of care homes because they've been taken away from their families, or their families don't exist, or they've been abandoned, whatever reason, there's genuine reasons, but what is the impact of those children in care homes outside of the structure of the family? We know the negative impact it has. We know it reduces their chances of success in any field, whether it's economically, socially. They are multiply disadvantaged, and this is well recorded and well known. Look at the rise of last year, especially in the pandemic, and even before that, mental health issues, well-being, the rates of suicide. All of these point to a society that is suffering from multiple effects of this individualism, this independence, this breaking away from values and structures that used to hold individuals together, that gave people a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. Now people belong to or seek belonging in mass gatherings, big concerts outside, outdoor concerts, right? Weekly sports matches, football, rugby, or whatever it may be, huge crowds, right? A sense of belonging. This is what human beings crave. So those aspects, family, the wider community, religious worship in congregation, those things have been replaced with the modern versions, obviously, because people still have a need for a sense of belonging, a sense of communion with wider society, congregation, to do things together as a group, that group identity. All of that is still needed. So hence, we arrive at this situation, whereas, you know, in this time and place when Muslims fast, for many people it's I mean, some people admire it. They say, wow, you must have such willpower to last 30 days without food and drink during the daytime. But to others it's like baffling. Why would you do that? Why would, it's so out of place. Like, why would you do that? Even though fasting is the number one kind of mode of weight loss and well-being and things like that, the 5-2 diet, the intermittent fasting diet. I mean, for, again, still material gain, to look better, right, to become healthier or whatever, it's still, you know, it's good, but it's still fulfilling that desire to live, isn't it? To protect oneself, to better one's health. Even though people would take out that from the idea of fasting, but when people look at fasting as a religious act, many people question, why would you do that? Why would you do that? It's almost out of place. It's almost out of place. And the reason being is because Islam provides us with this set of technologies of the self, is what they call it. A set of ibadah has many, many dimensions to it. Fasting has many dimensions to it, but one of the dimensions of ibadah, or fasting itself, is that it reminds us of who we are as an individual. It reminds us of ourselves, our nature, right? When we go without food, drink, and relations throughout the day, it reminds us of our weakness, our desires, that this is how we've been created. We desire food. We have a natural inclination, a need, of course, because it's our survival. But it reminds us towards our true nature. Secondly, it gives us training to control our lower desires. These are natural desires, We are built, we are created with these desires, but fasting controls that. So it reminds us of the fact that we can control these desires. It's about self-regulation. It's about a system of daily practice, of acts that refine the soul, that refine the individual, that strengthen the individual, that enables people to rediscover the meaning of being human being, the ability to control oneself, the ability to inculcate virtue, the ability to become patient, the ability to choose wisely before you act, right? This self-control is the very same thing which even the Greeks were searching after, this self-control of inculcating virtue, of justice, of wisdom, of truth, of courage, these good values. This is what the Greeks were talking about, the philosophers were talking about. This is what Christianity was talking about, inculcating these values, these virtues. So Islam comes similarly to inculcate those values. Fasting does that. Fasting is one of the greatest tools to strengthen our ability to control ourselves. In other words, self-regulation, self-governance. This is what it is. When I began in the beginning to say about how does fasting liberate the self and society, once you can govern yourself, and this is even what the ancients were looking at, how do you come to a situation where you govern yourself as individuals and as communities? So you don't need a dictator, an oppressor to tell you and force you to do things. This is what they were looking for. But in Islam, this is embedded in the daily practices of salah and other ibadah, particularly fasting, since it's the month of Ramadan. That gives us the ability, the training. What is the training? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. In order that you may gain taqwa. And what is taqwa? Without going into it, everybody knows. It's the ability to control yourself, right? It's the ability to direct your actions in accordance to guidance, revealed guidance, in accordance to Qur'an, in accordance to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guided us towards, that which is best for us in the dunya and the akhirah, right? That which will maximize our pleasure and minimize our pain, because that's how human beings act, right? You take away religion, at the core of it, at the base of it, when you leave individuals, right, in the model of liberalism, when it leaves individuals to do as they please, to act as they want, the freedom to follow your desires, the human being is psychologically proven, right, in studies. The key motivation is the pursuit of pleasure, maximizing pleasure. That could be through consuming, through food, through earning, through hoarding, through gathering material wealth. It could be in spending time in pursuits that give you joy and enjoyment, whatever it is. It could be sexual pleasures, which society has been seeking through various harmful means, as we all know. So when you leave individuals with that freedom, they will seek to maximize pleasure, and they will seek to minimize pain. Nobody wants to stay hungry. Nobody wants to suffer economically. Nobody wants to miss out. Nobody wants ill health, right? Human beings are created to avoid pain and to maximize pleasure naturally. This is the nature of the human being. What taqwa gives us, right? What fasting gives us, Ramadan, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, the objective of fasting is to give us this ability to gain taqwa. What taqwa gives us is the means to maximize pleasure and to minimize harm. How does it do that? Because we are talking about pleasure and pain in its absolute widest sense. Our lives as human beings is not restricted simply to the dunya. There's another life after this. And that's the problem with the current lack of belief. There's no There's no afterlife, so everything is about the present. Nobody can think about the future. But in Islam and in all authentic revealed religions, revelatory guidance and frameworks of morals and ethics, the hereafter is a given truth, and even in most ancient cultures. So taqwa gives us that ability to maximize pleasure in the dunya, hayatan tayyiba. You know, you will live a life that is blessed, that is full of blessings, that is wholesome, that is pure, that is good. It doesn't mean you're not going to suffer. That's a separate question. You will go through hardship as tests, etc., etc. But you live a life based on virtue, based on the good, right? You live a life that will be beneficial to yourself, to your family, to your society, right? And in the hereafter, you have the absolute maximal pleasure, both in the dunya and the hereafter, mainly in the hereafter, in paradise. And you avoid the pain in the dunya and the akhirah. Taqwa is a means to avoid the pain in the dunya and the akhirah. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, he mentions, you know, I don't remember the number, was it 70 or 60 negative effects or 70 negative effects of sin in the dunya. In other words, when you act against yourself, when you act, because that's what sin is, that's what oppression is. It's not simply you acting against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you're acting against your self-interest. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah mentions up to 70 negative effects of sin in this dunya, the harmful effects. And we know this, we see it. Things that are prohibited in Islam, whether it's relationships outside marriage, what are the negative impacts and effects of children being born out of wedlock, of having parents who are not committed to the maintenance of those children? What is the effects, what are the negative effects of alcohol abuse, of drug abuse? What is the negative effect of crime, etc., of oppressing each other, of deceiving others in transactions, financially, etc.? What is the negative effects of lying, of not being truthful? We know all of this, even without religion. It's common sense, right? But once we gain taqwa, it will minimize the pain that you suffer in the dunya. Not to mention the ultimate and absolute and maximal pain that is in the hellfire, in the hereafter. So taqwa is literally comes from the word which means to protect yourself, to erect a barrier, a shield. As-sawmu junnatun. The Prophet ﷺ said the fasting is a shield. It protects you from something. And taqwa protects you. You put up a barrier, taqwa, you put up a barrier to protect yourself from maximal pain in the dunya and in the akhirah, in the hellfire. So the technology of the self, which is fasting, one dimension of fasting, inculcates in us this ability to control ourselves, the ability to direct our desires, regulate our desires, and to direct them in lawful, beneficial means and routes. In other words, things that do not cause harm to society, that do not cause harm to ourselves. So in your consumption, in your actions, in your habits, right, in your pursuits, you are pursuing those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that has been revealed not only in Islam but all previous religions based on authentic revelation. You are pursuing things that are beneficial to the self, that inculcate virtue, goodness, charity, patience, wisdom, justice, truthfulness, etc. And the ability to control, overcome our desires. So the intellect and the heart controls the body and the desires, not the other way around. This is what fasting brings for us, because without that, the Prophet ﷺ said, there's many people who fast and gain nothing but hunger. There's many people who stand up in prayer and gain nothing but tiredness. Meaning they haven't fasted or prayed with the full understanding of why they're doing it, the objective of it. The Prophet ﷺ said, you know, Allah is not in need of you giving up your food and drink. It's not just about staying hungry. He's not in need of you giving up your food and drink if you don't give up false speech and acting by falsehood. If you don't give up those things, meaning fasting is meant to be a transformative act. It's meant to transform us because it's meant to strengthen our ability to control ourselves and direct ourselves towards the good that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guided us to. So in other words, it's a total different picture of the self, of the individual, right? This picture of the individual and the self in Islam is one who is in control of his self, who is self-governed, right? Self-ruled, in other words. So this person, even if, look, you know, people are fasting 18 hours a day. Those who practice Islam, right, seriously, they follow the rules of Islam whilst there are no laws in this country that enforce those rules. People follow the rules of inheritance, the rules of marriage, right, the rules of ibadah. They don't follow it because the state imposes this on them. It's self-rule, it's self-governance, right? There's no Sharia state here. There's no Sharia laws or police that enforce these laws here. But the communities are doing it nevertheless. That is self-rule, self-government, right? So this idea, this picture, this vision of the individual in Islam is one that is centered on the real true nature of a human being, that is centered on the purpose of the human being who was created to worship God, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's centered on the real meaning of this life, which is a temporary situation in which you are tested, in which you can either succeed or fail eternally. This is the nature of this life. So this vision of the individual is one that is in control, is one that is constantly trying to inculcate in his self or herself the good virtues of self-control, of speaking the truth, of wisdom, of truth, of justice, right, of worship, of knowing their place not only in the universe but also within the social structures, and protecting those structures, the family, right, the local community. Why do we pray in Jama'ah? What does that do? Why are there masjids everywhere, right, to establish salah, to pray? Because it also, apart from it being a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and other benefits, but one of the things it does, it locates you, it places you, it gives you an identity and belonging within your local community. It places you with other human beings. Even the Greeks viewed human beings as social animals, that they need other human beings. They need to live in societies. So this vision of the self, of the human being, is a positive one that, as I mentioned, is centered on a true understanding of human nature and what benefits that person, that individual. And it's centered on maximizing the pleasure and benefit of the human being and minimizing the harm and pain of the human being in the dunya and akhirah. Whereas the other vision that we have now currently, and don't think for a second that, you know, you live in a society and in a system that is just value neutral. No, it doesn't work like that. We may not see it. It's so pervasive, the impact and assumptions and values of liberalism, that we no longer see it, because it's embedded in society, in culture, in art, in economics, in media, in education. It's embedded, it's all pervasive, right? So what is the contradiction there? Look at the vision and the picture and the image of the individual that Revelation gives, that religions and societies based on the past gave, and particularly Islam as the last revelation gives. compare that to now this other individual that we're seeing around us, who is disconnected from identity. لِتَعَارَفُوا. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said He made you qabila, tribes and nations, qaba'il, so that you may know each other. لِتَعَارَفُوا is also the same word for to know your identity as well, to know each other's who you are, you know, your sense of belonging. This is so important. So you got this individual now living alone, disconnected from society, from social structures, from faith structures, disconnected from revelation, disconnected in so many ways and dimensions. And not only that, you have the idea of liberty, freedom, being the idea that it's whatever I can do. If I'm allowed to do what I'm doing, whatever I wish to do, whatever I want to do, that is freedom. And we can see where that's leading to. Wherever you look, we can see the negative impact of that. And what I began with in the beginning, the doom and gloom picture of even environmental, the climate change, much of that is fueled by this huge consumptionist, material, capitalist, economic framework. The whole economic system of production, overproduction and waste, right? Overproduction and waste, and to consume. This is what it's based on. The climate change, the warming of the globe, global warming. This is what it's based on. This is how it's come about. It's the values we hold individually and as societies and how we live. So fasting and Ramadan, this is how it impacts on the individual through giving us true liberty. For Islam, as that general said when he was sent, right, to speak to one of the rulers in early Islam, that we've come here to liberate men and women from the worship of men, or from the worship of other men to the worship of God, to the worship of God. We've come here to liberate men from the narrow view of men worshipping men. In other words, you being under the control of other men and worshipping them, to the expanse and vastness, liberation of worshipping God. And this is what fasting and Ramadan is. We can rephrase that today. That true liberation is to be liberated from the enslavement of our lower whims and desires, our base desires that end up ruining and destroying individuals and societies and communities. That is true liberation, and that's what religion or systems that are based on revelation, that's what they offer. A liberation from following your passion and desires to destruction. That is enslaving yourself, becoming a slave of God, becoming a slave, an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the true liberation. That's what fasting is teaching us. And it's teaching us this thing about, the other thing about this liberal individual today is surrounded and placed in the context of a total materialistic worldview, right? Anything beyond material is not important, and what is important is what you can see and touch, and materialism and consumption, consumerism. And fasting, obviously, Ramadan comes to break that. We are, whilst we're fasting, what are we doing? We're starving our physical bodies, and we are feeding our spirit, our souls, and we realize we can get by with so little. How little we can get by with, just eating very little we can get by with. We're supposed to come to that realization, but obviously, in many of our communities, our iftar time and all of that, we probably consume even more. But during the daytime at least, we realize that, listen, you don't need to eat 3 times a day in a space of 9 hours. You can get by with very little food. So Ramadan fasting reorientates us, focuses us, and reminds us of the fact that we don't have to be stuck in this materialistic world. We don't have to be dictated by only working and struggling and striving and spending all our life for our physical bodies and for material gain. But rather, what is more important is who you are as an individual, the self, the spirit, the soul, the heart, right? What are the values inculcated? What control do you have over yourself? You know, what's more important is the hereafter, the next world. So, and it makes very clear the converse relationship, if you like. I hope that's the right word, where it's opposites, right? You can't have both. Islam has a perfect balance between the physical, the dunyawi, and the akhiri, the ukhrawi, if you like. The physical and the spiritual. Islam has that balance. Islam doesn't forbid you from marrying. Islam doesn't forbid you from eating and drinking of the lawful, good things, tayyib, halal. Doesn't forbid you from that. It doesn't forbid you from becoming rich. There's a perfect balance. But in Ramadan, we are shown very clearly that there is this other relationship, that if you want the akhirah, if you want the hereafter, then you have to minimize and in some ways put your physical world on a diet. You have to control how much you feed your physical world, your physical bodies, your physical desires, your physical wants and needs. The more you can control that and minimize that, the greater growth, development and strength you will see in your akhirah, in your spiritual world, in your soul, in your heart, right? And that is the relationship which fasting brings around. So, in summary, fasting gives us back our true understanding of the self, of the individual, of the human being. It centers us back to realize our true purpose and our nature. It gives us the tool, right, a technology of the self by which we inculcate good habits, right, virtues, especially sabr. I mean, even in English, patience is a virtue, right? Sabr, this is fasting, month of sabr, right? It inculcates in us charity, right, caring for others. Muslims spend the most in Ramadan than they do compared to the whole year. The Prophet ﷺ was like, you know, the rain-bearing wind when it came to Ramadan. He was always generous, but in Ramadan, he was unlike any other time. So, in short, fasting inculcates in us these virtues, these good qualities, this control, self-governance, and true liberty. Once you achieve that, that will be reflected in society around you. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to understand our time and place and understand what Islam and Ramadan can do for us as individuals and communities, and how it speaks to our position today and to our context and situation today. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. The East London Mosque and London Muslim Centre has been providing vital services for our community for many, many decades, be that religious, social welfare or educational needs. During the COVID-19 lockdown, the masjid was shut for almost 5 months. And subhanAllah, what a testing period this was for many of us.
During the lockdown, we managed to provide many vital services for the community. For example, online Islamic talks, advice and counseling by phone, food bank, medicine delivery, and support for burials.
As you know, government restrictions mean that we are currently operating at reduced capacity. This has meant, like many organisations, the mosque's income has significantly reduced. The mosque needs your support now more than ever. Please do consider setting up a regular donation and a standing order. You can do this by visiting our website. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.